The Canadiens edged the Maple Leafs in overtime in another classic Original Six Saturday Nighter. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, comes to us from Bell Center, where the Maple Leafs fell 3-2 to the Montreal Canadiens in overtime. Rem Pitlick with the OT winner to give the Canadiens the victory in this one. And Dave, I think as we always talk about, when these two teams square off, it doesn't matter where either one of them is in the standings, how they're playing, any kind of storylines. It's always seemingly a tough battle, and the Habs just give the Maple Leafs trouble. They have now for a couple of seasons here, and they won the first game. We all remember opening nights, and then you've got this victory this evening, coming off some news about Cole Caulfield not playing in this game. The Habs banged up with guys like Jonathan Drouin out of the lineup. You would have thought guaranteed win night for the Maple Leafs, and it looked like that way, leading 2-0 after the first period, but things really fell apart there in the second.
Yeah, death, taxes, lower teams in the standings surprising the Maple Leafs for a victory, and Josh Anderson scoring goals against the Maple Leafs. Those are pretty much 4 guarantees in life. If you're watching, you're going about your day, you turn on the TV, or however you watch a Leafs-Habs game, whether it's in Montreal or in Toronto, it's always a coin flip. It really is. And in this case, Montreal, who's had a lot of guys out of the lineup. As you mentioned, the big bombshell, of course, was Cole Caulfield. Just surprising the Maple Leafs again. And, this is a tough one. Look at where the Leafs are. They can't go up. They can't go down. We're watching this game, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, I kind of get it. Like, I mean, there's going to be these times where they kind of get away, and it's going to be hard to be consistent for an 82-game season. And they also had chances in the first period where if they get a couple more, maybe this game is blown out, and then it doesn't even matter at that point. It was reminiscent in a lot of games the Leafs played last year, where they kind of got away from the defensive stuff that was doing well for them, and they just traded chances. They went back and forth, and early in that game, when I'm kind of like seeing, okay, there's one end, another end. We love it. It's entertaining, but that's the Leafs hockey they played last year that got them into trouble. And that might be the only warning sign. But again, I don't think they do this against some of the other teams. So yeah, it kind of feels like Groundhog Day in some regard, but I'm actually not surprised, just given how many more games the Leafs have to play. They've got games every other day. They're just kind of hanging on until the break here. And there's really not a lot to play for, aside from if you're going to host or start on the road against the Tampa Bay Lightning. That's really what it's coming down to.
And you still want to pick up these points. The Tampa Bay Lightning lose to Calgary, so the Leafs had a chance here to go up 6 points on Tampa Bay. They get the 1 point, so they're just 5 points up on Tampa, who do have a pair of games in hand. So even if Tampa does win those 2 games, they would have to head to Toronto if the playoffs were to start, of course, after those 2 games. They are not, so still something to play for here as far as home ice goes for the Maple Leafs, but these things are going to happen. Like, I know it always feels like the Maple Leafs lose these type of games, and hasn't been that case necessarily all season long. They've had some, missteps here or there, but, there's been games during the schedule, when they were on their incredible run through November and December, where we thought, okay, this is going to be it. Leafs are rolling. They're going up against a crappy team, and they're going to, crap the bed here. And that wasn't the case. So, we really haven't seen a ton of these type of efforts from the Maple Leafs, but it is really what you mentioned there, that second period where things went off the rails and they just decided, we're going to trade chances with the Montreal Canadiens because, without Cole Caulfield, Jonathan Drouin, do they really have enough firepower to beat us? And ultimately they did. But let's hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe with his assessment of this one.
Just to stay with it. Just stay with it. We played a great first period. They were in complete control of the game. I thought the first couple shifts of the second period were good too, and then we just let up just a little bit, lose a puck battle, and puck ends up in our net. So now instead of 2-1 in full control, it's 2-1 with some 2-0. Instead of 2-0 with full control, it's 2-1, and there's life in the building, and you could feel the game changing. So that's really it. Just can't let up. for even a second. I mean, because this is a team in this building especially. They're going to come. They're going to play hard. I mean, just in the last week, they win in New York, beat the Jets pretty handily in here last time out. Like, it's a team that if you give them life and you give them a chance, they're going to come and get hard on you. And they did in the second. I thought we were good again in the third, but obviously couldn't get one by them.
Yeah, and Sheldon Keefe making a good point there that his team did stick with it. They were really, really good in the third period, and Sam Montembeault really stood on his head in the final 20 minutes to send that game to overtime. But it's surprising, Dave, because that the second period has been really the best period for the Maple Leafs all season long. Yeah. They have the best goal differential in the second period, and you would have thought up 2-0 after 20 minutes. Okay, this is where they extend the lead to 3, maybe 4 goals, and then they just cruise to victory. But it's pretty uncharacteristic to watch them, how they played really in that second stanza and watch Montreal come back. But let's hear from Austin Matthews, who was asked about the message from Keefe heading into the final period.
I mean, just having some poise and confidence in our game that, it was a bad period, just shake it off, go out there and play hockey. That was really the message. And, I thought the third period, for the most part, there was some... Obviously, we don't want to play in this back and forth kind of, trading chances kind of game. I think there was points in time in the third that was kind of going on. But I thought for the most part we controlled the play, had some good looks, and like I said, just couldn't execute.
And as Matthews points out there, Dave, they did have a lot of good looks in that third period. They responded after that rough second period, so it wasn't as if, they completely went the opposite way and Montreal took over. The Leafs did regain control of the game, even though they weren't able to regain control of the lead.
Well, I don't think I've seen a game like this from the Maple Leafs where both or all 3 periods, the team that dominated had an expected goals of 81% or better. Like, it was really like a strange game that way, where the Leafs were so dominant in that opening frame at 82% of the goal share. And then Montreal comes back with 88%. I don't think any team has had that good a period against the Maple Leafs from that share standpoint, obviously translated in the goals. But that's how wild west this game was. Like not even just from end to end, but period to period, the game just changed. Like, the periods replicated what was happening in the game in terms of it's our turn, it's their turn, it's our turn. Then the overtime was just as wild because 3-on-3 is always wild, right? So yeah, it's, I don't know, like, you can kind of be concerned about the inconsistency, but, that third period, they did get it right back together, and they just don't get the goals. And then Sam Montembeault gets control of the game, and he's pretty good. And look, I mean, we'll get to Ilya Samsonov, but he was also pretty great. You couldn't fault him on really any of those goals. Like, yeah, one of them, he kind of comes across and it's kind of a low danger shot because the player's kind of trailing in and he can just go across, and maybe he went too far too quickly. But that second goal, I don't know how he made that first save. Like, that first save was incredible before Raphael Harvey-Pinard picked up the rebound with nobody around. So, like, it was just, I don't know. It was such a strange back and forth wild game. Again, another one that's entertaining to watch.
Yeah, it definitely was.
But very, like, weird.
Incredible name, first of all, Harvey-Pinard there with the goal.
My brother's name is Raphael.
Oh, there you go. That's perfect.
So, like, there's a little bit of, hey, a guy who has the same name as my brother scored a goal, which is not common. Like, Rafi Torres may have been the closest afterwards.
I got to know what the nickname is. It's got to be Rafi, right? Like, that's got to be the nickname for Raphael Harvey-Pinard. Raphael Harvey-Pinard. It feels like Rafi. I don't know. What is your brother's nickname? Now that
we just call him Raf.
Oh, there you go. So Raf is good too, but that we'll have to figure that out, because that's one of the coolest names going in the NHL, in Raphael Harvey-Pinard. But the Maple Leafs, like you said, tested Sam Montembeault a lot there in the third period, but he was able to stand tall. One guy though that did squeak one past him was Mark Giordano, scored the Leafs' first goal of the game in the first minute of the first period. He says the team just overall was not good enough defensively.
I think it's more about us, we got to stop trading chances with a team like that. I think it got a little bit, when we got into trouble tonight, it was back and forth. When we locked it down in the neutral zone and had shifts in their zone, that's the style we have to play. And I think that's the case for most nights for our team. When we're dialed in defensively, we're pretty good.
Yeah, and it's like I said before, really, few and far between that we've seen the Maple Leafs thoroughly get, dominated in the second period. And, maybe we'll never know. They did talk a lot about trading chances and whether they did that, consciously or subconsciously, that they thought, what, Montreal's missing a bunch of guys. We can just go out there, do our thing, and Samsonov's going to be able to hold the fort for us, and we'll be just fine. Or whatever the reason is, I guess we'll never truly know. But that's sort of the hallmark of this Leafs team. And Matthews pointed on as well, Dave, that they can shut things down defensively. That is their calling card this year. They are not. They can still run and gun, but that's really not their identity this year. They are a team that, makes it tough on the opponent defensively. They are able to, score on the chances that they get, but pretty rarely now do we see the Leafs get into these types of games where, it's just back and forth and through the neutral zone and turnovers and back and forth chances. Like, that's not how this team wants to play on most nights.
No, and so it's interesting because we put out that Twitter poll, right? Like after that second period, because that second period was so bad, and at the time it was very reminiscent of the yesteryear Leafs, right? The ones that didn't lock it down defensively or couldn't adjust. And so I think what puts the fire out, which is why we're not as fiery or sounding the alarm about this game, is that within a snap, that period starts for number 3. And there's no overreaction. We were kind of talking about it as a group up in the press box, like, oh, maybe because of the way things were kind of going, maybe we see Matthews and Marner back together or some sort of real pivot that way. Because up through that first 2 periods, the Matthews line was like at 24% combined expected goals, and the fourth line, Montreal's fourth line, was getting it done against them. So there was a real kind of panic that, like, does this carry over, or are they able to just kind of get their collective breath and change the pace of the game? And they did. Like, they were able to do it so much, and it's not one of these kind of score adjusted things while they're trailing, and that's why they had an 80+ expected goals. It's tied. Like, both teams are going for the equalizer here, and it was Montreal on their heels. So, like, it's clear who the better team was overall. It doesn't necessarily reflect in that. And yeah, they miss out on getting the extra point in overtime. And perhaps that's why Sheldon Keefe wasn't so fiery about this game as he could have been after that second period. But I remember even asking in the beginning, it's like, how much can you reflect on that first game of the season and how far your team has come since then? And so he's like, it's like, well, yeah, I mean, that was a long time ago, but we changed pretty quickly and learned from that, and they're a very different team than when they were here. So you could give them this one. It's a lot of games coming up in a short period of time, and the fact that they were able to right the ship quickly and it didn't kind of bleed over is probably why this game doesn't get people in a panic too much.
Yeah, it's just a game, one game. And if you're looking historically at the Leafs playing down to their competition, well, that should give you optimism that won't be the case. Because in the playoffs, you're not playing the Montreals or the Arizonas of the league. You're playing the best teams, and they tend to, bring up their level against the better teams in the league, even though they haven't been able to get out of the first round in recent years. But tonight, probably just a one-off. I would not expect this type of game to continue for the Maple Leafs moving forward, but still a tough pill to swallow as they lose this one to the Montreal Canadiens. But let's get to Ilya Samsonov, who was making yet another start, and man, made some incredible saves in this one, Dave. There was an unreal sequence there at one point. I think it was in the second period where he was just all over the place, was down, making a ton of saves, and that might have been the best sequence by a Leafs goalie so far this year, with just the desperation saves that Samsonov was making. And just again tonight showed that athletic ability that he has to be able to get to anywhere he needs to get to make some really acrobatic stops. But it would have been interesting, I think, had the Leafs won this game, whether it's in overtime or, earlier in regulation. Who would have made that start on Monday for the Maple Leafs against the Islanders? Do you keep running with Ilya Samsonov? Maybe they still do because he was really good in this one. Or do they go back to Matt Murray? I think, they probably go back to Matt Murray, but I think it would have been a really interesting talk and discussion had Samsonov won this one.
Yeah, I'm not sure what they would have done. Like, it was really interesting. I know that they wanted to do that whole venue reversal where they have Samsonov play that road game and then Murray gets some more at home to try and see if the records can kind of balance out. But you're right, up until even that overtime goal was an overtime goal, but Samsonov was brilliant again. In that second period, there was no business for that game even being just tied 2-2. Like, it could have been wild and it could have really come apart for the Toronto Maple Leafs at that point. And it wasn't like the tarantula save that he made the other night. But that wild sequence led to, him kind of getting gashed in the face and had to get looked at by a trainer because he got hit pretty hard in the face. He said his jaw was a little bit sore after that. I don't know. Like, this guy's on another level right now. Now, as good as it goes, it could come back down. That's been Ilya Samsonov's career, and we saw that for a small stretch, in the second half of December and going into the early bits of January. So it's hard to get too carried away. But yeah, like those stretches of saves there was starting to feel like, okay, he's not necessarily going to steal them this game, but he's going to be the reason that this game doesn't really lose complete control because he's just flying around there. One of the craziest thing about what he does, which I haven't seen a lot of goaltenders do, is he's so aggressive on the attack split save. Like, he sees a shot coming from one end and he comes so far out and just goes right into the splits to get the toe on it. It's just... It's wild to me, like, just how aggressive he is on these. And I know he's been working a lot with Chris Sanford on it, but you almost wonder, okay, save your groins here a little bit here. Like, some of this is just, it's a little crazy, but as long as he can do it, he's not getting hurt, it's fine. And so, just a stellar performance. He seems to be like the one who's more in a groove than the others, but I agree with you that I think Murray will get the start, although I've been wrong on a lot of these. Like, I didn't think Samsonov would get this run. This is kind of unprecedented with Matt Murray available and healthy that they went with Samsonov for 3 consecutive appearances in goal. If it's 3 consecutive starts, then that's a real problem because none of them have ever done that under Sheldon Keefe with both guys healthy. And so for that reason, I think we do see Matt Murray on Monday.
Well, there was a lot of crazy stuff that happened in front of Samsonov tonight. He spoke post-game about some of those weird things, including having his mask knocked off by a Mike Hoffman shot and also getting clipped by a Canadiens player.
What went through your mind when it looked like you got clipped there? And there was no call. Was you really upset about that?
No, I don't want to talk about referees, but I think he's missed what time. He's stupid for me. It's 100% to this penalty. And a couple moments where I lost my mask, my helmet. He didn't say nothing. Yeah, I'm asking him, what you doing? It's just about me or what? Yeah. But nothing crazy, just a little bit emotion. It's a hard game. It's a lot of emotion.
Yeah, and I think, that's been one of the good things to see about Samsonov, who at times this year has mentioned, it's been tough mentally for him. He's gotten maybe a little bit too emotional. His first game as a Maple Leaf, his first game against Washington. But, he does seem like a guy that's recently been able to really keep his composure. And maybe it was that, sort of mental reset that he's talked about to try to turn things around where, hey, things are starting to happen that are positive now for him, that the confidence is building. And, when there's just so much chaos going in or things are not going his way, he's able to, regain that focus, because, the Montreal Canadiens score those 2 goals there to tie up the game. And maybe he could have blamed himself and thought, oh, geez, like, I let these 2 goals in, it's on me. But, he comes back and really is strong for the rest of the game. Tough one on the OT goal, but, they don't get there without the saves that he makes, after that second goal and in the third period on some of those.
Yeah, and I can't remember if we talked about this on the podcast last episode or not, but the mental aspect of it, like, he starts revealing these little nuggets that are kind of interesting. Like in that first period where he made the 16 saves, he reveals that he didn't even know how many shots he had faced in that opening period because he doesn't look at the scoreboard ever during the game except for the penalty clock to count that down. And when I followed that up with him the next day at practice on Friday, I just kind of asked him off microphone just a little bit, just kind of asking where that comes from, all that other stuff. And he said a lot of that is mental. Like he said his coaches told him when he came over here that if you let that stuff get into your head, it's just another variable that you have to deal with instead of the focus, which should be on what's happening in front of you on the ice. So losing track of that kind of stuff in the game is fine because he's just keeping his eyes forward on the puck tracking, on all that other stuff. And he doesn't let himself react to any little things that don't need to be reacted to from a mental standpoint. So it's not even a superstition thing, which I thought it was initially. It's really just he came over and even though he was letting in goals, he was also just told to try it, and he saw he wasn't getting as worked up, whether it was score, shots, things like that. And so, he could talk about it casually, even though he said he didn't want to talk about the referees. He talked about the referees, but he also, dismissed the fact that it's an emotional game and he understands and he's able to calm down and compartmentalize it pretty quickly. So, it's progress. It's something goalies have to deal with on a daily basis. It's very hard in this league. And he was very busy tonight and seemed to kind of just be in the zone with the exception of maybe 1 goal. But other than that, he was pretty stellar. And right now he's been the better of the 2 goaltenders between him and Matt Murray right now.
It is so funny how it's different from player to player, goalie to goalie, what they need from an emotional aspect to, perform well. I think of just even on his own team, like Michael Bunting clearly needs to have a lot of emotion in order to play his game and be active and,
right,
get in there and do all that stuff to be an effective player. Whereas maybe the goaltending position, you would like to have someone that's more level-headed, more calm, more poised, and, not swaying too much on the emotions. I think of, Jordan Binnington as a good example of that, a guy that seemingly has to play on the edge in order to perform well. Now, that being said, he has dialed it back quite a bit. I think after having been spoken to by the coaching staff that you can't keep trying to pick fights with the opposing goalie or the opposing team, like that just isn't helping your game, and he's not having a particularly good season. But you would think that's the one position, goaltending, where you don't want to get too high, you don't want to get too low, you just want things to, sort of slide off your back as they come. And they're going to get upset. And Samsonov was pretty animated when the mask came off because he's like, geez, my mask is broken here. The strap came off. Like, I need a whistle. But you're getting clipped. Guys are skating into you, flying into the net, crashing into you. Like, there's just a lot of stuff that, goes on.
He was pretty fired up.
Right. There's a lot of things that go on with goalies, though, that you don't really think of too often because there's just, traffic. Guys are digging away at his neck, when he's trying to dive for a puck. Like, there's just so many things going on. So it is hard, I would imagine, to not get fired up or get too emotional about it because, things are happening in front of you and you're like trying to control so many different things.
Yeah, and goalies look at what happened with other goalies earlier in the season. And so when the strap comes off and he has to take it off himself, like he's worried about getting Ottingered, right? What that happened in Dallas where he had to take the mask off because it was broken and he got a penalty for it because he took it off. Now, the difference here was Samsonov, all he had to do was bend down and the mask came off. So it was a little different that way, where if he actually would have had to take his hand and grab it, that would have been bad. But and perhaps a penalty. The crowd was upset about it, but that was the key difference there. And so that comes after not getting that clipping call And yeah, so like he's already fired up, already trying to calm himself down from that. And then that happens, and goalies don't want to play with emotion. They really have to try and stay in the moment and read everything and let the play come to them. But then when that happens, it's hard not to get frustrated. So he kept it cool for the most part at that point, was still a main reason that the Leafs came up with a point after how much of a disaster that second period was.
Okay, let's get to one of the guys that you mentioned off the top, and that, of course, is Josh Anderson, who now has 12 career goals in 29 career games against the Toronto Maple Leafs as a member of the Columbus Blue Jackets and now the Montreal Canadiens. He, of course, is from the Southern Ontario area, so he obviously grew up watching the Maple Leafs. He's from Burlington, just about an hour and a bit outside of Toronto, and just seems to bring his A game. I know he is someone that a lot of Leafs fans always enjoy watching and wonder if he would ever be a trade target for the Maple Leafs, maybe even as early as this season. I'll be honest, I have never been the biggest Josh Anderson fan. I think, for a guy making $5.5 million, probably should be producing more. And if he's playing against the Leafs like this all the time, great. But he doesn't seem to be doing this as often against other teams, and even on his own team outside of tonight, where because of Cole Caulfield, like he has not been able to crack the top line too often. He was a very prominent offensive player this evening. But like, is that a guy that's even crossed your radar this year, Dave? Because I know a lot of people I've seen on Twitter throw that name out. Why don't the Leafs go out and get Josh Anderson? He'd be a perfect fit.
Well, the first reason why it would be a bad move is because $5.5 million is one thing, but that's the cap hit for the next 4 seasons after this, with a modified NTC as well. So, yeah, I mean, look, he would be great as a rental, I think. Like, you plug him into the right spot, and that might make sense. But when you're taking a chance on an older forward, how old is he now? He's 28, right? So, yeah, so like once you get to years 25, 26, and 26, 27 of that contract, that could be a huge liability. That's where you could start to see the production dip. And yeah, the cap might go up substantially there, but you still don't want to waste money. And the way things are kind of trending right now, I don't see Josh Anderson living up to that value of the deal for what he produces. Now, you put him with the right weapons, and sure, he can do that. But I mean, look, he's got 13 goals, 3 assists, 44 games going into tonight. Now I guess it's 14, right? So I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's goals there, but that's not a $5.5 million player that you want to take on for 4 more years after this one. I don't see, like, the Leafs are already going to have problems trying to re-sign guys with cap space available. That to take that on would be a huge albatross for them for a spot that they can fill for a lot cheaper.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's really the biggest thing. Like, he's scored 27 goals once in his career, and he has all the tools, right? He's a great skater for a guy his size, but his production has not lived up to a $5.5 million player. Like, that's just the reality of it. So I think there's some other targets that are more interesting to me. We'll get to one of the other targets. There was an interesting name that was thrown out tonight on Hockey Night in Canada by Elliot Friedman, and we'll talk about him coming up later as well. But back to the Maple Leafs, one line that continues to star in a certain way, Dave. I mean, the production has not been there. They haven't scored a single goal yet at 5-on-5, but Pierre Engvall, David Kampf, Bobby McMahon, once again, they are generating a ton of shots. They're generating a ton of expected goals. I think, I was looking at moneypuck.com, and I think it had to have been prior to tonight's game, but I'm sure the number's gone up. In like the 22 minutes of action, they're generating almost 5 expected goals per 60 minutes, but they have 0 goals. So, they're not being able to finish those chances right now. But I would love to see this line continue to get, more run. Like, they're just not doing anything right now. I think that warrants breaking them up. At some point, they will score a goal. One of these 3 gentlemen will score a goal at 5-on-5 for the Toronto Maple Leafs, but they are, we saw it tonight. Sheldon Keefe relied on them very heavily in a tight game in the third period and a lot of big moments.
Yeah, and there was this one play, I don't remember who it was on. It was defensively, or offensively actually. He got sustained pressure by just staying at it and chipping the puck with his stick like very late into the corner boards and extending that play just by getting his reach on it in what looked like in most cases would have been the end of an attack and the beginning of a retreat. But because he was able to kind of swing his stick around and move the puck away from the player for an extra inch, that allowed his line mates to turn around and continue the attack going for what was about another minute. And like those little details are what the Leafs are really high on with McMahon. And even before the game, Sheldon Keefe was talking about Bobby McMahon's work habits away from the game and all these other things that he's been doing that are just part of his daily grind to the rink and how he approaches the game, to the point where it's not like a guy who just comes, performs, does well, does okay, whatever. They see how much time he puts into his craft, especially now that he's been with this team on the road here, to just get better and study and look for advantages on the ice, that he's allowed the line mates that he's playing with to get better in that spot. And so that's all Bobby McMahon. That's the trust that he has now got from Sheldon Keefe, and probably a spot he's going to be in for a little while longer. Wouldn't surprise me if Pontus Holmberg is called up pretty soon. And perhaps maybe they do something where against the Islanders and for the rest of the week, maybe they bench both Hunt and Simmons and move Kerfoot over to the wing, because that fourth line at times looked like it probably did need a little bit of help, even though expected goals wise it finished okay. In the second period, it was not. So, yeah, I think you're going to see some changes there. But yeah, Bobby McMahon is going to be very hard to take out of the lineup at this point, just because a lot of the off-ice stuff that he's done to kind of win the Leafs over, but also that one play was just you don't see that from a rookie, being able to kind of extend the play like that with those little details like he was able to do tonight.
And he brings an element that the Leafs don't have in the bottom six right now. He's, outside of Pierre Engvall, who is a big guy that can skate, he's maybe not as physical as Bobby McMahon, who, is in the corners and digging up pucks away. And like you said, just doing some small things like reaching out and extending a play because of his size. Like Alex Kerfoot, great skater, but not a big guy. Zach Aston-Reese, not a big guy, not a great skater, but you've got Bobby McMahon, who has that package right now on that wing alongside David Kampf and Pierre Engvall. And I think it's so clear for me right now. Like, maybe things will change. I'm sure they will. But as it stands right now on January 21st, 22nd, like Bobby McMahon's on my playoff roster. Like, he's starting game one against the Tampa Bay Lightning. And Pontus Holmberg's in there as well. Alex Kerfoot, Zach Aston-Reese, and Pontus Holmberg. That's your fourth line. Kampf, Engvall, McMahon, your third line. You're hoping that the Maple Leafs make some acquisitions, but I'm just going under the premise that this is the roster they're starting with right now. So, up front, you're set. And I think we saw it again tonight. Like, Connor Timmins is also in for me. If, this is the lineup you're going with, and TJ Brody's not available, but, an impressive pass to Kalle Järnkrok for a goal tonight. And it's now 12 points in 16 games as a Maple Leaf. And the Leafs got this guy for a minor leaguer and Curtis Douglas. Like, it just continues to pay off for the Leafs and Connor Timmins as well.
Yeah, and so I mean, there was the best and worst of Connor Timmins in this game. Like in that second period, I remember he tried this one play where the pass went back and it led to a turnover the other way. But apart from that, yeah, look, if he's not contributing offensively, he's one of the guys that comes out of the lineup. But they were quick to put him back in. In favor of Jordy Ben. I still think the Leafs could use another depth defenseman if they have the room for it, in addition to a top six forward. But again, like we talked about, the cap space is not plentiful, and so it's going to be very hard for them to find the room to acquire someone.
Yeah, it is going to be a challenge for sure, and things could change, as they always will, before the trade deadline. But it is still, fun to speculate about the playoff roster and, who might factor into it. Because, guys we did not expect to be talking about at any point this season are, now a factor. Like, I don't think anybody would have thought Pontus Holmberg is probably a lock right now for a playoff start. Clearly Kyle Dubas had mentioned Holmberg last year as someone that could be a contributor, but I think even if you gave Kyle Dubas the truth serum last year when he brought up Holmberg, is this guy starting a playoff game for you? He would have thought, okay, hold your horses a little bit here. Like I said, he's going to be a contributor. I don't think he's going to be starting a playoff game, but he's one of your top 12, I think, right now. And as it stands right now, I think Connor Timmins is probably your third pairing defenseman alongside Rasmus Sandin with this current construction without TJ Brody. So guys are factoring in Bobby McMahon, as we mentioned as well. So things are always going to change. But as it stands right now, I mean, those three names in particular are making a difference and showing that they can contribute at the NHL level. Do you have a last point there?
No, I was going to actually ask you, do you think Alex Kerfoot's in that top 12?
I do. I do.
Yeah.
I think, as I mentioned, it's probably Engvall, Kampf, and McMahon as my third line, and I'm probably going Zach Aston-Reese, Pontus Holmberg, and Alex Kerfoot for my bottom, for my fourth line. So, I mean, unless you think the Wayne Simmons element matters, I mean, he had a good game tonight from the advanced numbers perspective. I think part of that.
Well, the other element is if they add a top six forward, right? Like if you add a top six forward, you're pushing out another player.
Exactly, and I mean, Cal Yarncrook would drop into the bottom two lines. I think that's pretty obvious. But I think I'm just going off of the lineup as we have right now. I mean, my hope is that the Leafs do make some moves. They need some upgrades, and I think we'll talk about it coming up in the second half of the show. But as it stands right now, these are the guys I think I would have in my playoff lineup. But the Maple Leafs did not get the job done tonight. They fall 3-2 to the Montreal Canadiens in overtime. Coming up, we will get to the Bodog line of the day and talk about some rumors surrounding the Maple Leafs, as well as they might be interested in a certain defenseman from Columbus. That is coming up next here on Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It is Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Is your online business ready for the cookie-less future and set to properly capture your customers' valuable first-party data? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out just exactly how ready your website is for the cookie-less future. Your online presence has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
It is Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who is at Bell Center. The Habs winning at 3-2 in overtime against the Maple Leafs as Rem Pitlick gets the OT winner. Time for the Bodog line of the day. And after the first period, Dave, Leafs lead at 2-0. I think they were somewhere in the neighborhood of minus 640 to win the game. So if you put down a wager on the Habs, you're feeling pretty good with this comeback victory for Montreal. So it just kind of gives you an idea of how big of a favorite the Leafs were coming into the game, and especially after the first 20 minutes with that 2-0 advantage. But we talked a little bit about it earlier, but this whole thing about the Leafs playing down to their competition, in years past, it's definitely been a thing. But so far this year, maybe it hasn't. Can you put your finger as to why, these types of things do happen for the Leafs? You've been around the team. I'm sure people are always trying to find a reason, a narrative as to, how this keeps happening. But what's your theory?
Yeah, I think this really has a lot to do with the fact that they feel like they're preserving themselves over a long period of time, and that it is a grind, and there's different elements that make it that sharpen the focus for other games than it does against other ones. And it's funny because I remember Bob McKenzie going on a segment at TSN 1050 back in March of last year when they were having these same kind of struggles with Montreal. And he said that the management and team had conversations with the leadership group about the specific issue. And instead of just kind of being open to talking about this issue, the leadership group just kind of nipped it in the bud and said, don't worry about those when it comes time to deliver. We will. And so that was the mentality. And the mentality was, when the playoffs matter and all that other stuff, they're going to get it done. What happened? It didn't get done. And so, you can't crack the whip at that point because they played pretty well in that series, and it was against the 2-time defending Stanley Cup champions at the time. So I don't know if the lesson was necessarily learned at that point, right? They still had those same kind of struggles, and they still have those weird ebbs and flows. And so I don't know what it's going to take. But I mean, you take the bad with the good. If that's the bad and they're still on pace for all these points and stuff in the standings and they have a record year, I mean, how hard on them can you get, right? Like the one thing that was different between this season and last year is they haven't had games where the doors have been blown off. Like there's been very few of those, if at all, where last year there were a couple ones that just kind of looked downright ugly, and every team has those. And so we probably look at it more in a microscope on a daily basis because expectations are so high, not just because they're a good team, but because they're a good team that hasn't achieved anything when it matters, so that when the good stuff happens, the good stuff isn't celebrated. And when the bad stuff happens, Leaf fans get the PTSD about this and just kind of remember, oh yeah, it's that again. So it's just these things that people are just kind of growing impatient and waiting for until April comes around. And if they bounce back from this and then beat the Islanders like many feel they will, then these get forgotten and there's not really a lot of tape to kind of go from it, especially now because the third period turned around so quickly after how bad that second period was. Like it really was separate games within the game. And so you really go hard on them because their last 20 minutes was that good. So, and the game was tied. So, I mean, yeah, there's a lot to be learned, but at the same time, how much is this game going to mean in the grand scheme of things? I don't think necessarily they're going to look at this and be like, this is why this bad stuff happened. But I do remember last year when management reportedly tried to talk to them about this and they kind of stopped it. I wonder if maybe they should have had a deeper conversation about it, but they just didn't feel it was productive at the time, and here we are.
Yeah, and the reality is bad teams beat good teams every single night in the NHL. So it's not as if, this is the first time a team headed for the lottery, the Connor Bedard sweepstakes, is beating a team that's better in the standings than them. Like the Montreal Canadiens do have a bunch of wins this year. So they're not like the worst team historically. That might be the Anaheim Ducks, who, interestingly enough, did beat the Maple Leafs earlier this year. But I saw a stat on Twitter that the Leafs have taken 4 of 12 available points against the Ducks, Coyotes, and Habs this season, which is not great. Right. But the terrible thing is for the Leafs that even if they did pick up all those points, they're still trailing Boston in the standings because they're just on a ridiculous all-time heater. So, it's, it would be closer, the Leafs and the Bruins, but just goes to show you how good Boston has been this year. All right, let's get to an interesting report that came from HockeyNet in Canada in the second intermission with Elliot Friedman and Jeff Merrick. But Friedman mentioning that the Leafs have been one of the teams that have looked into Columbus Blue Jackets defenseman Vladislav Gavrikov, who, like Josh Anderson, I would say is another guy that has had his name thrown out there and linked to the Leafs. And I think there is a section of the fan base that would be interested in a guy like that. I believe he is a UFA at the end of the season. And as I quickly look it up, that is correct. He's making $2.8 million this year, 27 years old, will be a UFA at the end of the season. More of a stay-at-home guy, has a bit of a nasty side, Dave. But I think, you hit the nail on the head earlier, talking about maybe the bigger need for this team in the top 6. Because I look at this game tonight, and they generated almost 5 expected goals, and they only scored twice. And yet you hear people talk about the need for someone that can, bang the puck off the glass and out in their own ends, when, a bigger need might be someone that can put the puck in the net. If it's harder to score come playoff time, maybe get people that can score goals then. That would seem to be a more pressing need for me if I'm the Maple Leafs. But what kind of insight can you share on maybe Vlad Gavrikov and the Leafs' interest there?
Yeah, so, I mean, look, he's 6'3" and 221. In terms of the size intimidation factor. But remember, the Leafs acquired Ilya Lyubushkin because they felt they were kind of missing that big, rugged, skilled defenseman who could play on the top four if pressed into that situation. And that's what Ilya Lyubushkin did for much of the end of that season when they acquired him, is they had him paired with Morgan Riley, and he did it well. But Lyubushkin was a right-handed shot. Gavrikov's a left-handed shot. But Gavrikov and Lyubushkin played together at Yaroslavl Lokomotiv. They know each other very, very well. And so they kind of have similar styles that if the Leafs were interested in someone like Lyubushkin on an expiring deal last year, this makes perfect sense in terms of another Lyubushkin type that could play on the other side. And it doesn't matter what side the Leafs at this point, because, even though he is a left, they've got guys who can play on the right now. That's not an issue for the Leafs anymore in terms of their depth. So you have a guy on an expiring deal. His cap hit was more expensive than Lyubushkin's was at the time, but you can get someone who plays key minutes, albeit for a bad team right now, but can do it, can also contribute at times offensively, but also be a physical presence like Lyubushkin was. And so it fits that MO why Toronto would have interest in someone like him. How far that's going to go, it's going to depend. And again, the cap hit is pretty high compared to what Lyubushkin had to deal with in a world of not a lot of cap space. Something might have to go back the other way, or you might need multiple brokers again, like the Leafs have done, but then you're going to need multiple brokers for the other situation you might need to acquire on up front. So it's going to be a challenge for sure.
I guess for me too, I'm wondering, in a guy like Gavrikov, I think one of the other names that I've seen thrown out there, Jake McCabe of Chicago, who I think, would be a really solid add, is, who's coming out of the lineup, right? I mean, not that Mark Giordano or Justin Hall or Timothy Liljegren or Rasmus Sandin, like, you're not necessarily never going to find a guy that can replace them. They're really solid defensemen, but they're not a Victor Hedman or a Cale Makar or something of that ilk. Is, let's say you bring in a Jake McCabe or you bring in Vlad Gavrikov, like, who's coming out right now? Like, I'm not sure they're necessarily big enough upgrades to, replace even a TJ Brody when he comes back. Like, that to me is one of the more key guys on this defense core that the Leafs have. So I think that's sort of, why I'm questioning some of these names that get thrown out there. Who are they
Rasmus
replacing?
Sandin.
Maybe Rasmus Sandin is in the trade for a guy like Jake McCabe. I'm not saying that's a smart idea. I'm just throwing that out there. But that's really, for me, the biggest question mark I have. When we talk about a top six forward, it's pretty evident who's coming out. It's Calle Yarncroke on that second line. But I think on the back end, it's more of a difficult conversation. Justin Hall, for all his detractors, like, he is a guy that still provides value. And I think, he's not irreplaceable, but it would have to be an upgrade. Like, you're not just bringing in Vlad Gavrikov and then just sitting Justin Hall. I don't think that's a move that makes a ton of sense for me personally.
No, and I mean, but they do want the depth, so they just figure injuries are going to come, and then you don't like the way the Leafs defense looks if the injuries do come. And granted, it did perform well with guys called up and mixed around into that spot. I think they want to make sure that their depth is stronger in that spot, and so I always think that there's just the expect the unexpected. If you get a depth guy, you're going to need everybody because injuries are just going to happen, and it's also how you're going to make space for these guys. So there's also that element to figure out as well. But the other thing with Jake McCabe, I mean, that's 2 more years at a $4 million cap hit. So that's quite the lofty commitment you're making for someone like that. So you have to be sure he is absolutely the solution. The good thing is he does play both sides on defense. Sure. So, I mean, that would help. Like, that would make him another TJ Brody in that regard. And then they kind of have to worry about, not worry, but like, I mean, he's got 1 more year than TJ Brody has committed. So, I mean, you have a pseudo replacement if you don't have terms agreed to with TJ Brody when his deal expires at the end after next season.
Yeah, like Jake McCabe, like that as a guy, if you're putting in there, Justin Hall is probably coming out of the lineup in your top 4. So it would have to be, that type of upgrade for me to, replace one of the guys that is currently going right now with this decor that the Maple Leafs do have. All right, let's wrap things up with media meal musings. We teased it the other night, of course, you heading to Montreal at the Bell Center, where hot dogs galore. You are the Joey Chestnut of the media group. At least
no, there's other people eating
true?
more hot dogs than There's everyone eats the Chien Chauds here, which, by the way, I think I've mentioned we call them Chien Chauds, and all the local French media hate that we call it that. So, which is probably why we keep calling it that, because we are funny that way. They just call them hot dogs. Yeah, it's the Panini Press, man. It's great. I haven't even put that TikTok in there yet. I only teased it because I actually did what the actual medium meal was, which was okay. $15 was pretty pricey. Ooh. I mean, it's not as expensive as the $17 one at Scotiabank Arena now. It's insane. Inflation, man. It's real. But yeah. And then you looked at all the other stuff, and I'm just thinking to myself, okay, yeah, I don't know. We're gonna have to wait this one out a little bit, and so I there's some variety there, but it's I had a very late lunch at a market where I had some Thai food. It was fantastic with the Bodog people. Shout out Bodog, and yeah, it was a very interesting layout here. But the Montreal meal's kind of hit and miss, but people come for the hot dogs, and those are free. And so because of that, I have my late lunch. I'm like, you know what? I'm full. I don't need to super indulge in the medium meal. It looks okay, but A, it's expensive, and B, the hot dogs are the main event of the Montreal attraction. I put ketchup on mine. People hate the fact that I put ketchup on it. Anytime I share ketchup, they're like, why are you disgracing your hot dog this way? If you're going to put one condiment, it's mustard. I did not do that. And I had a colleague tell me that ketchup as a condiment is a very age-specific thing. If you're of a certain age or younger, you're a ketchup person. If you're a mid-40s or above, you're a mustard person. And that's where it's like the millennial versus Gen X fight.
Interesting.
Lies directly with the hot dog ketchup versus mustard one condiment debate.
Interesting. Full disclosure, I'm a ketchup guy on my hot dog.
You're near my age.
We're around the same age. But But I don't know, this may disgust some people, but I've taken it even beyond that. Like, I'm a ketchup, mustard, and occasionally mayo guy. Like, I put mayo on the hot dog. Oh. Have you ever tried that? Like, it's pretty strong. Like, it's not maybe S tier, but I think it's, right up there. So if I have the ability to do it, I will do it.
I'm not opposed to trying it, but one thing I do, because I don't like a lot of mustard, but I like the tiniest bit of tang, the mustard hint. Like, I like the hint of mustard, right? Because if you put too much mustard, it could be pretty strong. And so, yeah, exactly. So what I try to do is I do a regular line of ketchup, and then as needle thin a line of mustard as I possibly can on top of it. Because to me, that is the right amount of mustard. Anything more than that is too much. And it's just overpowering, as you mentioned. So I'll do that. And the mayo just, to me, it just seems like it would just kind of not add, not take away.
Try it. You
find it adds? You find it adds?
Oh yeah. I mean, next time you have a hot dog, whether it's in Montreal or wherever, throw some mayo on it and let me know.
You ever try the fancy stuff from the hot dog stand, like the crunchy onions or whatever that fake crunch is?
Sometimes I'll do the bacon bits. Like, I've tried that before.
Yeah.
It's not my favorite thing, but I'm not a bell pepper banana pepper. I'm not a
no.
Sauerkraut. Like, I'm not a sauerkraut guy. Like, that's just too much for me.
Right.
Like, occasionally relish. Like, I'll put the relish on the hot dog. Like, I'm cool with that.
I'm anti-relish in so many ways. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm okay with it, so I don't hate it. But yeah, if I could just pick one condiment, I think I'm with you. I'm putting ketchup on it. So sorry to all the people there that are anti-ketchup, but that's just how we roll here on Rink Wide Toronto. But that'll do it for this edition of the post-game show. We're back at it on Monday when the Maple Leafs take on the New York Islanders. Make sure to like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, at RobWong34, and get the podcast at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Wong. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. You've been listening to Rink Wide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Ray Ferraro and Darren Drager from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Dregs, we're getting into your favorite part of the year. It's insider season.
Yeah, the March 3rd trade deadline is in sight, and general managers' phones are ringing as front offices are trying to figure out what they're doing, buyers, sellers, and the storylines, Ray, and the trade rumors, they're blowing up now across the league.
Yeah, we got it all covered, Dregs, along with the top hockey guests, twice weekly, here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get your podcasts.